and welcome back to Babble. I'm Megan Thomas, and in today's episode, I'm chatting with fantasy author Andrea Stewart. Andrea's first novel, The Boneshard Daughter, is an epic fantasy which she'll tell you about in juicy, spoiler-free detail during the interview. And it's part one of a trilogy with Orbit Books. Andrea, how are you? Thank you for coming on today.
Oh, I'm good. It's the morning here, I think, and afternoon over there.
Yes, that's right. In fact, you've got up really early to do this, so I'm very grateful. I've got just a nice afternoon. Do you usually start your days this early?
I do. I usually wake up at 5. So this wasn't too terrible, really.
Why? Is my next question.
Well, it's just kind of like my routine. I've been doing it for years. So I wake up at 5 and then eat breakfast and then work out, go for a jog, and then come back and start my day.
And what does your usual kind of day look like? Do you have a day job or do you just do writing?
I do not have a day job at this point, which is really nice. So I just do writing. So I do have a 6-month-old daughter at the moment. So right now, what I do is, I get up, I do my routine, and then I cart her over to my sister and brother-in-law's place, where we share childcare. And then I just do writing all day, basically. I take a break for lunch and then treat it like a regular job.
That sounds dreamy.
It is pretty great.
Yeah. What writing are you doing at the moment?
So right now, this is one of the funny things about publishing is that you kind of feel like you're constantly living in the future and living in the past, because I'm doing promotion for the paperback release of The Boneshard Daughter, but I am also working on the 3rd book. So there's that, and then also going over proofs for the 2nd book. So that's currently what I'm doing.
Amazing. I wonder if you'd be willing to just give the audience a little synopsis, a spoiler-free synopsis of The Boneshard Daughter and what it's about.
Yeah, sure. So it's an epic fantasy that's set on an archipelago of islands that is ruled by an emperor, and it follows the viewpoints of 5 characters. So one is the daughter of the emperor who is trying to reclaim her place as heir to the throne. Another is a smuggler who professes to not care about things, but always finds himself somehow doing good things. And 2 of them are 2 women who are in an established relationship who are dealing with the class struggles between them. And another is a woman on a distant island who is not sure why she's there or what she's doing, and she's kind of uncovering that mystery. So all of these stories do interlink.
Wonderful. Yes, and so writing in general is obviously an immense talent, but when you're writing not only the characters but the world they inhabit, there must be a lot going on in your head at any one time when you're writing. How do you organize it?
There is definitely a lot going on. So it's funny because when I wrote the first book, I kind of just wrote down notes in a Word document for some of the world building stuff. And then I thought that was good enough. And it was for one book. But then when I started getting into book 2, I realized that I was kind of losing track of things. You kind of forget some of the little details, what age was this character again? And where are they from? Or even what was their name? So I actually started my own little private wiki online, so I can kind of refer back to that. So it's got background information about the history and the islands and the characters. So if I forget anything, I can go back and look at it. So hopefully I can stay consistent.
Yes. Well, I feel like when the series is finished, you can then make that a public page and all your fans can go flock in and read an almanac of their characters' history.
Oh gosh, I'd have to neaten it up a little bit. It's a little bit messy right now.
Yes, that's very organized and better than kind of a box of sticky notes. At least we live in an age where you can organize it in this way.
Oh yeah, it's super helpful. I mean, it was essentially a box of sticky notes before, so
Yeah, just a digital box of sticky notes now.
yeah.
And so I'm sure then it's also helpful because when you're writing a series, you know what's going to happen so much further in advance than your reader does. And you've probably got to be quite careful about not giving away spoilers or telling someone something that they shouldn't know yet.
Yeah, I have to be a little bit careful about that because I get really excited about the ththings that are going to happen. And then people ask me stuff online like, oh, is this what's going to happen? Or is this theory correct? Like, I have to be like, I can't really say anything. And then I do post little snippets from future books sometimes on social media. And then I just have to remember to redact certain things. It's tough, especially with the 3 books, like remembering what I've revealed in book 1 that maybe people would know at this point, but stuff that's in book 2, I sometimes get mixed up. So yeah, I have to be a little bit careful about that.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking the publishing deal that you have is for all 3 of the books?
It is for all 3. So that is one of the nice things that I definitely get to write them.
Yes, absolutely. And how did you get from kind of having a finished novel to the publication or to the deal that you?
Oh goodness.
Is that a long and winding road?
Oh, it is. It's funny because when you have your deal announcement and everything, it looks like you are this like overnight success, but it doesn't really tell the story of everything that's come before that. So I actually started trying to get a book published in 2013. So it's quite some time ago. Yeah. And so I had started querying agents. I queried agents over 3 books. And I got an agent on that last one. And that was in 20... Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was 2007 I started querying. I got an agent in 2013.
Wow. Even longer.
Yeah. And then we had that book go out on submission. It did not sell. I wrote another book that went out on submission and it did not sell. And then I wrote this book. And then this one went out on submission and we started getting interest right away, which was very exciting for me because it was a lot of rejection for the last 2, that and radio silence. We started getting a lot of interest and then eventually ended up deciding between going to auction or taking a preempt from Orbit. So we ended up taking the preempt and I was very excited about it. I love Orbit's books. So it was very exciting for me to land there.
Yes, well, congratulations. It's obviously so exciting and it sounds like very well deserved because it's been a bit of a long haul.
It's been a struggle. Yeah. When I said 2013, I'm like, oh, that sounds like too soon. Yeah. I'm like, it's been forever. So,
and that seems like it was in this decade. And so were all the books that you'd written fantasy?
Yes, they were all fantasy. There were a couple urban fantasy books that I had written just in a very kind of different voice as well. I was trying something, trying something different there. But yeah, they were all fantasy. I actually do write science fiction as well, though. So I have like something that is in progress at the moment.
And do you read a lot of fantasy? Is that how it all started?
Oh gosh, I read a ton of fantasy. So ever since I was a little kid, I think being that like shy, nerdy kid in the back of the classroom that like, never wanted to raise her hand, fantasy was just an amazing escape for me. And I also feel like people kind of undersell it as just like fluff and entertainment, but I feel like it definitely got me through like hard times, just, being that kind of outcast kid. Because you read these stories and it's oftentimes somebody, who's kind of coming up from the bottom that nobody expects will be the hero, right? So that was very encouraging to read as a child.
Yes, absolutely. And I read a blog post that you wrote for International Women's Day about how people need to stop bashing the romance genre. And I was
Oh
wondering,
yeah.
yeah, I was wondering whether this is something you find. Is there literary snobbery around fantasy?
There's snobbery around, I think, a lot of genres where people tend to think that literary is better than genre fiction, and people in genre fiction will bash like romance. Yeah, I think there's always that kind of, willingness to believe that what you like or what you are working on is objectively better than something else.
Yeah, and it loses sight of hopefully the reason lots of writers are writing, which is for people to enjoy it. And if someone likes it, they like it. It doesn't actually matter what kind of genre or theme it takes on.
Oh, I completely agree.
Yeah. And so now tell me a little bit more, if you will, about your process. How do ideas come to you? When do you sit down and write something to a schedule? It does sound like you treat it like a bit of a 9 to 5 full-time job, but
I
how do you go
yeah.
about
Well, I mean, before when I wrote The Boneshard Daughter, I did have a day job, so I kind of had to work around that.
what were you
But
doing?
usually, oh, oh gosh, this is
Oh, okay. This is a
I was
story for later.
I was a compliance officer at a university, which for grants and contracts, so
Right.
not the
Okay.
most like glamorous or exciting thing in the world.
Yeah.
But pays the bills, and I didn't hate it. It was fun and sometimes. So,
As you
um,
were.
but I think for me, like ideas, the base idea for something generally will percolate for like 2 to 5 years or more, where I'll just have this like kind of thought spinning in my head for a while, like what if I did something with this? And then I'll kind of jot down notes about those ideas. So I have a document that I just have like ideas. So I'll start like jotting things in from like just different things that I might want to include in a future book, like thoughts about characters or thoughts about the world or the magic system or things like that. And then once it feels like it's ready to write or I have the time to write it, then I sit down and I put together an outline. I go chapter by chapter with a book like The Boneshard Daughter, where it's got those multiple perspectives. I'll actually tackle each one on their own first, so I can make sure that they have that complete arc, and then I'll kind of like interweave them together depending chronologically and everything, how that makes sense. And then I just sit down and write it. The outline does tend to change while I'm writing it, but I find at least having a loose roadmap helps me. I feel like I spend less time staring at the keyboard and dithering about like what happens next. So that's kind of my process in getting a rough draft down, and then I'll go back and revise.
Do you have a go-to first reader?
I do, and it is my sister. I dedicated the first book to her. She is an incredibly fast reader, which helps because I've written a lot of stuff. So she's basically read like everything I've written. And she's not like, as in-depth critique as like my editor or agent would be, but I find like she catches inconsistencies or like really ridiculous stuff that I might have done, and she's very encouraging. And I think for that first draft, that's very helpful. You feel like you haven't just put together absolute garbage.
Yes, and especially someone who does read a lot, they're good at picking up top points that might not make sense, especially if they're reading it fast as well, because it's obvious to them, which when it's taken you so long to write might not be obvious to you.
Yeah, definitely.
I talk a lot to authors about writing their lives into their fiction, which seems like it's probably less of a thing for fantasy, or if not more, because you have another layer of discreteness. So that people can't claim that they can see themselves directly in a character. But do you find that you still still draw from your own life into your characters?
I do. I think just because it's fantasy, I feel like there is still a very human element to it. You're still dealing with very human struggles. Besides that, like I wanted to have this book in an Asian inspired setting. So some of the interactions between some of the characters kind of draw upon like the way that I grew up and some of my experiences, like everybody kind of getting together to make food and meals, and like everybody kind of having that close family ties. And just like I think some of the things that my main characters are dealing with on a personal level, like Lynn, who's the heir, she's dealing with like her father's like constant disappointment. And Jovis, you know, who's dealing with trying to come to terms with his missing wife and the grief that he's feeling. And I think these are very human experiences that like everybody has gone through. So I definitely drew upon my own feelings there and how I've kind of gone through those life experiences.
Yeah, well, it really shows that no matter what the genre is, the kind of point of a story is to feel some kind of connection. So even if you don't have the magical powers that your characters do, or the characters you're reading do, you obviously have the same feelings as them, which is what makes reading The Boneshard Daughter so gripping and entertaining. I'm glad that you mentioned food, because there's a lot of food throughout the book, and it's clearly something that's important to you. Do you find yourself actively putting it in there because it's important to you, or is it natural because it's so important?
I put it in there because it is important to me. It's kind of funny because like I talk a lot with like my sister and my brother-in-law, since like we are all like working in the same place, and we're constantly talking about food and what we're going to be cooking or what we're planning on making this weekend. And it's very different, I think, culturally from my husband, who is like not into that kind of thing at all. And so I definitely found myself putting a lot of that stuff in there, because not just that it's something that I feel is very like large part of my life, but I also think that it shows a lot about the characters and about their worlds and about their culture. Because I think like the different islands, like they have different like dishes that are their specialties. They have different ways that they serve things. So it kind of just shows a little bit of the culture there as well.
So I'd love to talk now a little bit about your artwork, which if anyone out there wants to go and have a peruse of Andrea's website, there's some really lovely illustrations of her characters. This is obviously something that you do yourself, Andrea, is that right?
Yeah. Oh, I think I've illustrated some of my new characters. I think I have to put that on there as well.
A reminder. So yeah, do you draw your characters first? Do you write them first? What's the process?
Oh, I definitely write them first. It's funny because I oftentimes don't have a very clear picture in my head of exactly what they look like. If I sit down to draw them, definitely that's something that I have to think about. But I know a question that people have often asked me is, who do you imagine playing your characters if there was a television adaptation or a movie? And I always have to think about that for a really long time. And like, number one, because I don't know a lot of actors, I'm not like as familiar. And then two, because I have to think like, well, who do they look like? I'm not really sure. So yeah, definitely I write them first. Like I have more of a feel for their personality than what they look like going into it. So
that's great. And so if I understand correctly, you used to write short stories before you took to novel writing. What was this transition out of short story writing caused by?
So I still do write short stories. I agreed to do a couple anthologies, so there's definitely going to be some more coming out. But it's kind of funny because I actually started with novels, and the short story thing I started doing because I thought that if I had publication credits, that maybe it would be easier to get a novel published. That's not true. So don't feel like you have to write a short story if that's, if you want to get a novel published. It did not help me, but it did help me figure out a little bit more about story structure and how to properly end a story. Because I think when you are writing novels all the time, it's kind of a big undertaking. It takes a while to finish one. So you're not like ending a story as often as you do when you're writing short stories, because you can do that obviously a lot faster. So I think that it gave me a lot of practice at that. And then I think just once I got the book deal, I kind of have to focus a lot of my energy there. So I'm not writing as many short stories as I was before. Definitely not.
Right. And I actually would love to jump back to what we were saying about how you're asked whether your characters look like actors and who you'd want to play. Do you foresee your stories being put to screen?
I actually don't think it's ever going to happen. But I'm like, as the author, I have to be a pessimist, because it's like if you get your hopes up about something, it's oftentimes it does not work out. And that is kind of one of those things that people always ask about, but it very seldom happens for most authors. I know that it was out with film people. I'm not really sure what's going on with that. But I think it's a little bit unlikely just because, there are a lot of creatures in it, but I feel like it would be a little bit expensive to make unless it was animated. So I'm like, probably not going to happen. Although that is a question that my parents ask incessantly, which is hilarious. I think, it used to be, you should be like a doctor or like a lawyer or an engineer. And now it's turned into, when are you getting a movie made? They're very funny like that.
Yeah. Well, you can say if you can fund the HBO backing of the CGI, then maybe. Yeah. Well, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you and hearing what kind of goes on beneath the surface of something like an epic fantasy. And thank you for coming on to Babble today. And I really encourage everyone listening at home or watching at home to grab a copy of The Boneshard Daughter, because there's 2 more still coming. So if you get into it now, then you're sorted for a while. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.